The courtroom was silent except for the tapping of a gavel. Judge Raymond Whitaker adjusted his glasses, his lips curling into a smirk as his eyes landed on the man standing before him. "Mr. Carter," he sneered, his voice dripping with disdain, "you seem to think you know the law better than this court, but you're out of your depth. Men like you always are." Gasps rippled through the room. The words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. At the defendant's table, a young woman bit her lip, fighting back tears. The man Judge Whitaker had so casually belittled wasn't the defendant, it was Daniel Carter, the man representing her, and Daniel wasn't just any lawyer. But the judge didn't know that yet. Daniel stood calmly, his posture firm, his eyes locked on the bench. Years of training and discipline kept his voice level even as fire burned in his chest. He had seen arrogance before, but to be publicly humiliated by someone who was supposed to embody justice, it stung deeper than any insult. "Your Honor," Daniel said evenly, "with all due respect, I'm here on official business. Perhaps you should review the credentials on file before you dismiss me." The judge chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Credentials, please. I've seen your type, loud, overconfident, but never prepared. This court doesn't have time for theatrics." Daniel paused, then slowly reached into his briefcase. Every eye in the courtroom followed his hand as he pulled out a leather badge holder. With deliberate calm, he opened it and placed it squarely on the table for all to see. The gold insignia gleamed under the fluorescent lights. United States Department of Justice, Federal Prosecutor. The room erupted. Jurors whispered. The gallery gasped. Even the bailiff's eyes widened as he leaned forward for a better look. Judge Whitaker froze. His smirk vanished, replaced with a flush of embarrassment that crept up his neck. His gavel trembled slightly in his hand. He realized in an instant that the man he had mocked, the man he had treated like an amateur, was a federal prosecutor, sent to oversee the very case he was presiding over. The balance of power had shifted. Daniel looked up at the judge, his voice calm but cutting. "Now, Your Honor, shall we proceed with respect? Or would you prefer I make a formal report about this court's conduct to the Department of Justice?" The judge's lips parted, but no sound came out. For the first time in his career, he felt small, cornered, exposed, and humiliated. And in that moment, the underdog rose. The trial moved forward with a different energy. The judge, now subdued, tread carefully with his words, afraid of another misstep. Daniel presented evidence with precision, his arguments sharp, his confidence radiating through the room. The young woman he represented sat taller, her faith restored by the man who had stood his ground. But just when justice seemed inevitable, a new shadow crept in. Halfway through the proceedings, Daniel noticed something odd. Key pieces of evidence, documents that had been securely filed, were missing. Witnesses who had sworn to testify suddenly recanted their statements. It wasn't just a coincidence. Someone was pulling strings behind the scenes. During recess, Daniel confronted the court clerk. "Where are the financial records we submitted last week?" he demanded. The clerk shifted nervously. I don't know. They were here. But this morning they were gone." Daniel's instincts flared. This wasn't negligence, this was sabotage. That night, as he drove home, headlights appeared in his rearview mirror. The car followed him for miles, turning when he turned, slowing when he slowed. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. He knew intimidation tactics when he saw them. When he finally pulled into his driveway, the car didn't stop. Instead, a voice called out from the rolled-down window as it passed. "Drop the case, Carter, or next time it won't just be missing files." Daniel stood frozen, the night air heavy around him. The arrogance of Judge Whitaker had been nothing compared to this. This was bigger, darker, more dangerous. And Daniel realized with chilling clarity, the trial wasn't just about his client anymore. Someone powerful was willing to bend the justice system to protect themselves. But Daniel had spent his whole life fighting uphill battles. And if they thought fear would stop him, they had chosen the wrong man. He walked back into his house, his badge catching the light one last time before he set it on the table. His mind was already racing, planning his next move. Because the real fight had only just begun. The arrogant judge who belittled Daniel had fallen, but a deeper corruption had been revealed, one that threatened not just his case, but his very safety. Would Daniel expose the truth, Or would the forces working against him succeed in silencing him before justice could be served? If you're really enjoying this story so far, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that notification button so you never miss my latest uploads. Now, let's get back into the story. Daniel Carter had faced arrogance before, but what he had uncovered in Judge Whitaker's courtroom was something far worse. The humiliation he endured at the start of the trial was nothing compared to the storm brewing behind the scenes. Someone was tampering with evidence, intimidating witnesses, and trying to sabotage the case at every turn. But Daniel wasn't the kind of man to be intimidated into silence. He had sworn an oath to uphold the law, and he wasn't about to let corruption strangle justice in its grip. The next morning, Daniel walked into the courthouse with a new plan. His colleagues saw the dark circles under his eyes, but also the fire burning in them. He was done playing defense. Today, he would strike back. The gallery was packed once again, whispers filling the air like static. Judge Whitaker sat stiffly on the bench, still humiliated from being exposed in front of everyone, though now his tone was noticeably restrained. He avoided Daniel's eyes as the hearing resumed. Daniel stood holding a slim folder in his hands. His voice was calm, but each word carried a weight that silenced the room. Your Honor, before we proceed with testimony, I have reason to believe this court has been compromised. Key evidence has gone missing, and witnesses have been threatened into silence. The judge's gavel slammed down. Mr. Carter, this is a serious accusation. Do you have proof? Daniel smiled faintly, a trace of irony in his expression. As a matter of fact, I do. From the folder, he produced a stack of photographs and affidavits. They were surveillance stills, taken from the courthouse's own cameras, showing a man slipping into the evidence room late at night. And the man wasn't just anyone. It was the judge's own clerk, the very person responsible for safeguarding the documents. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Jurors leaned forward. The bailiff's face went pale. Daniel's voice grew sharper. This clerk wasn't acting alone. These break-ins coincide with meetings between him and one of the defense attorneys outside this very courthouse. Your Honor, the chain of corruption leads directly back to this trial. Judge Whitaker stammered, his face reddening. He tried to regain control, but Daniel wasn't finished. Furthermore, Daniel continued, I received a personal threat last night, delivered by car in my own driveway. The message was clear: drop the case or face the consequences. Well, I stand here today to say I will not drop this case. Justice will not be silenced. The room erupted again, this time in murmurs of support. Even the jurors, bound by silence, couldn't mask their approval. The defense scrambled, but it was too late. The weight of the evidence was crushing. Daniel submitted the surveillance footage, the clerk's bank records showing unexplained deposits, and sworn testimony from a security guard who had witnessed the exchanges. By the afternoon, the trial had transformed. No longer was Daniel the one under scrutiny. The very integrity of the court was now on trial. The climax came when the bailiff escorted the clerk into the room, now in handcuffs. His head hung low as he confessed to everything: the stolen files, the bribes, and the threats. And when asked why, his trembling voice revealed the truth. I was told by people with power that if I didn't, I'd lose everything. They said the prosecutor needed to be stopped. The judge's face turned ashen. He slammed his gavel again, but the irony was unmistakable. His own courtroom, the stage he once commanded with arrogance, had become the scene of his undoing. The jury wasted no time. With the missing evidence restored and the corruption exposed, the verdict was unanimous. Daniel's client was found not guilty, fully exonerated after weeks of harassment and intimidation. But Daniel wasn't done. He stood tall, addressing the room one last time. His voice was calm, yet every word landed like a hammer. Justice does not belong to those who manipulate it. It does not bend to intimidation, bribery, or prejudice. It belongs to the truth. And today, the truth has spoken louder than fear. The gallery erupted in applause. Strangers stood to their feet, clapping for the man who had turned humiliation into triumph, who had refused to bow, even when the system itself tried to break him. Judge Whitaker, his career in tatters, sank lower into his chair. The irony was devastating. He had tried to belittle Daniel in front of the world, and now the world was watching him crumble. By evening, the story was on every news channel. Headlines blazed. Federal Prosecutor exposes court corruption. Daniel Carter's name was everywhere, no longer just as a lawyer, but as a symbol of resilience in the face of arrogance and hate. At home that night, Daniel sat quietly with a cup of coffee, exhaustion finally catching up to him. His phone buzzed with messages, colleagues congratulating him, strangers thanking him, even former clients reminding him of the lives he had touched. For the first time in days, he allowed himself a smile. Justice had been served, not just for his client, but for the very principles he had dedicated his life to protect. Life lesson. True justice is not about power or position. It's about integrity. Arrogance may sit on the bench, but truth will always rise higher. Now let me ask you, if you were in Daniel's shoes facing both humiliation and intimidation, would you have had the courage to keep fighting, or would you have walked away? Comment your answer down below, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this one.